Dina's our protagonist, and she is the outsider. All good dark academia novels have an outsider. Ada Mae is her foil and sort of the one who she is the legacy student. She's the one who has like the deep family ties to Bellarton College. Um, Prissy is generally known as the Texan in the novel. She has an eating disorder, and although it's not called that at the time, there was no kind of concept of eating disorders. But she's the Texan and is new money, so is kind of often rubbing Ada Mae the wrong way. Sheba is very loud, very outspoken, probably the most like conventionally in terms of behavior, non-feminine one of the group, and has an interesting background because her father is like a snake oil preacher, essentially. And Sheba is in this like on again, off again relationship with Fred, who I do make fun of a little. She's from Baltimore, and so sometimes other characters can't understand what she's saying because of her Maryland accent, which I admit I did have fun playing with that. And Fred is a lesbian, and so she and Sheba kind of have a relationship together during their time at Bellarton. And who am I forgetting? Nell is the odd one because she's Catholic in a setting where Southern Protestantism is like really central, and also she has terrible acne, and so, and so she gets kind of made fun of, poor thing. And that's the core group of the Bells, and then there's this authority figure, Mrs. Tibbert, who is the wife of the college president, and she doesn't have actual power because she is a woman in the 50s and is not kind of given that official power, but she certainly has a lot of authority over the girls at the school. And she really wields that quite closely. And she's the one who gives that moniker, the Bells, to this core group of women. At least in my mind, the Bells is really like about toxic white femininity, and I think this kind of concept of ideal, of feminine ideals. And I think the 50s was a time, in my research, as I say, because I wasn't alive during the 50s, when you had like conformity was strong, the idea of like you had to kind of keep up with the Joneses, and you also had to fit in with the Joneses, especially if you were white and middle or upper middle class. And I think a lot of those ideals we see now in like the trad wives, which is a really interesting and personally I find it terrifying callback to a period of time when, in the 50s, like at that point, women, regardless of their class or their racial identity, were not allowed to open credit cards under their own names. Clearly this is before abortion was legal, before we had birth control for women. Although I guess abortion is not legal again in this period of time. But there was like the 50s were such a period that I think people look at with this really rosy lens that at least for women, and certainly for a huge segment of the population who weren't women, and who weren't white women in particular, like this was a time where you didn't have a lot of agency, where women didn't have a lot of agency, there weren't a lot of choices. And so I think the idea of a women's college as a setting where you suddenly are in this place that's training you on how to uphold these ideals. And yet, you, for the first time, maybe ever in your life, and probably for the last time in your life, have like a certain degree of freedom to kind of do and think and be a little bit more independent than you've had when you were living under your family's roof, and specifically your father's house, right? It's like the pater familias, and and uh, and then certainly that you'll have when you're married to your husband, and then like your identity becomes kind of subsumed under him. And so I thought that like friction was really interesting, right? Like you're being trained to become a certain person and to assume a certain role and to fit certain ideas and expectations. And yet you're in this place where you're like, maybe I'll kind of go a little bananas and bonkers one day because, yeah, when am I ever going to be able to like fight with my friends in a physical way like this ever again? I want to like underline that a lot of this depends on who you were, like what social class you were coming from, and also your racial identity, right? And I think if you were, working class woman, certainly if you were a Black woman or, any other woman of color, like things are going to look very different. And your experiences of kind of these different expectations and ideals are going to look very different. But like for the middle class, upper middle class, like white women in my novel and of that era, whether they were in the North or in the South, because the novel is set in Virginia, um, I think certainly like external presentation, so your appearance was wildly important. I actually did a lot of research, reading the student handbooks at women's colleges, primarily in the South, but I read some at like Smith College and other schools in the North, and they very, very directly were like, here is the expectations for how you are going to dress. And like the days you can wear blue jeans and the places on campus you're allowed to wear blue jeans and like the approved lipstick shades. And, some of these ideas I work as interstitials into the book because I was fascinated. I was like, this is wild. Like these women are 18, 19, 20, they're in college. And, you're like, well, you can only wear pants on like Tuesdays when you're not at chapel or whatever the rules were. And that was wild to me to read that. And then of course I went and read the handbooks for men's colleges, which really, they touched on things like appearance, but it was a lot more centered around academics, those handbooks, and also centered around the experience of college. It was like, make sure you hang out with your fellows and have a good time, but don't have too much of a good time and not be able to show up to class the next day like har har har, right? And for women, it was like you have to look a certain way and you have to behave a certain way. Yeah, things like gum chewing, like gossiping, where, like don't do these things. Like if you don't, people won't like you. And if you're not likable, it's gonna have enormous consequences on your ability to find a husband and to succeed academically and just these enormous pressures that I do think have shifted. I don't think they've totally gone away, unfortunately. I do think, you know, you can see vestigles of those in different contexts, if you're a woman, just moving through the world, right? And um, I think those pressures preceded the 1950s, but I think there was a certain kind of coalescing of some of those pressures and made explicit in the 1950s.